Hulk Hogan go to hell? Let's get into it. Listen, I'm waiting for the Hulk Hogan kind of fakeness of people backtracking about what they're saying to just, mull over. Because I feel that people all of a sudden change their opinion when someone dies. And I was chatting to my husband about this, about how do you chat about the dead? And it's fair, you don't want to mock people. You don't want to be insensitive. Someone's lost a father, someone's lost, their husband. I'm sure he's meant something to people. Like, I guess, think about your boss, like a boss you don't like at work, right? It's really hard to humanize them, especially when they've been mean to you. But at the same time, they could be mean to you, but at the same time, they could be good to someone else. So it is a bit complicated. Now, I'm talking to you from a black perspective. If you don't know, I'm black involved. Sometimes I cover my face and try to hide my identity because of my other interests and businesses. And we can all judge, and I said that I'm flawed, but it's a very complex legacy what Hulk Hogan has. And sorry that I'm not at my studio today. I'm actually in a hotel to go on a business course soon on a Sunday morning. And the recent news of Hulk passing is really apt for this channel about wrestling conscience, about thinking about the conscience of wrestling. And wrestling is such a unique art form or sport where we blur the real life and the pageantry and the storytelling together. Now, when Hulk Hogan, we assume Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, is the person, like any death of any public figure with a complex history, it's brought again the forefront of a series of vital and uncomfortable questions. And as a black individual, black British, coming from Jamaican parents, and someone who values critical thinking and accountability, these conversations hit really home. And in my artistry, in my other life, I do really think about archiving, thinking about people and memory, and what do we take from this. And when a figure is so iconic and charismatic as Hogan when he dies, the immediate impulse is for many people to celebrate his contributions to their life. And we cannot deny that from the 80s to the 90s. I cannot sit here and be dishonest and say that I have not enjoyed or have not been entertained by Hulk Hogan. NWO for life, baby. And people talk about Andre the Giant. I was too young for that. So I've come in the NWO, I think WrestleMania 18, Don't Kill Me, with The Rock. And Hulk Hogan, when Hulk Hogan had to turn babyface and Rock had to turn heel. That's how I really got entrenched into Hulkamania. And in his late career, this guy was probably nearly 30 years ago. That was like, I think it was around 48, 49, WrestleMania 18 when that happened, which was such a great event. It wasn't the main event, but that's another story. As I said, when this charismatic figure dies, people want to celebrate the contributions, but before his death, people wasn't calling it. People were really anti-Hogan. So I just feel like there's a lot of hypocrisy in the world when someone dies. And I feel like if you felt that way about that person was living, and why don't you feel that way when the person dies? As I said, I don't think it's ethical for you to stamp on, dance on people's graves and say horrible things. But this is, having examined life, you have to really think about this thing. And you got to think about the pain, what this person's caused to marginalised societies, and it hasn't really changed. You can have different political beliefs, but if you're sprouting hate publicly and doing that and you haven't learnt from it, it does show the type of character who you are. And unfortunately, this, which brings up, I'm sure when people die, they don't want to be reminded of the atrocities and pain what they give people. But unfortunately, action has consequences. I'm not saying we should compare this to Benoit, a murder. I'm not saying compare him to a rapist. What I'm trying to say is, like, when you do unfavorable things and you didn't go on the path of redemption, people are going to bring it. So unfortunately, you have to bring the good, the rough with the smooth. And Hogan legacy undeniably has impacted the way of the world of wrestling and pop culture. And it's been tarnished by his racist remarks and the way how he's treated people. Now, we know that wrestling is very competitive and people want to protect their spot, but to what cost? And just because he's been nice to one black person like Booker T or gave him one look at opportunity doesn't mean you have to absolve all of the bad things. You can still be a nice racist. And just because he's nice to Booker T or he has little shots with Titus O'Neil doesn't mean it absolves him from all the hateful things what he's done and still continues to do, and so blasé about it because he has a following. It's not about cancel culture of a lack of forgiveness. It's about the necessary reckoning of the impact of words and actions, and from people who have that influence. Now, the question is, do we judge a racist? How should we judge a racist? And it's a debate about ethics and nature of the judgment itself. From a Kantian perspective, actions are judged to different moral laws. Now, racism violates the principle of treating all individuals as ends to themselves and not merely as means. So therefore, judging an act of racism is morally wrong and imperative. So we can, anybody in sane mind, whether they feel racist or not, know that it's bad, to discriminate against people. And that's what he did, and that's how he feels, and he hasn't done anything to redeem himself, apart from when it comes to monetary gains. However, judging people is really complex because have I done anything wrong? Which, should I be judged for one action for the rest of life? If when a felon or a prisoner goes to prison and they, change their lives, or, are we all open to rehabilitation and for redemption? And the context of, upbringing, personal growth, we agree that racism is wrong, but act of labeling a person racist and deciding their fate, we are the public, like judge, executioner, and jury. Are we going a bit too far? Especially if this is an entertainment or sports entertainment. So are we on the bit when someone makes, mistakes? Can we forever judge that person? Are we witch hunting that person? Are we metaphorically, socially burning him to the witch, stake all the time for he says a mistake of being caught out saying these horrible things? And what's recently on his kind of MAGA rants and what he says about Kamala Harris, which is quite racist, to be honest, no matter how much you want to spin it. And what I want to invite you to think is to abstain from all judgment and just talk about the great things he's done and the great things he's done. It's very harmful to marginalised communities because you have to take the rough with the smooth. Yes, he was influential, but at the same time he tarnished his own legacy. There's reports of him being a liar, lying. There's reports how he treated people backstage, how he trampled on people, how he was not a very moral person to his daughters, to his son, and how he treated that son when the person who was in that car accident, his wife, all these type of things, ex-wife, sorry. There's a lot of things what you could look at him and his moral judgment his moral compass has not been great if you want to examine his life. And it's really acknowledging, which WWE tries to erase, acknowledge the real harm caused by racism and affirming such behaviour is acceptable, reinstating him in the Hall of Fame, thinking, is this just America? I always talk about wrestling as like a microcosm of, American culture. It's an American export. People value money over morals, unfortunately. Yeah, a lot. Because if you really feel about morals, Hulk Hogan should never have come back. If you can release, what's that guy who had a suspected domestic violence? He was with the New Day. I can't remember his name, He had a suspected thing with New Day. Domestic violence. There's no evidence that he did anything. It escapes me. But then Nikki Bella can come back where she has evidence of hitting somebody with a shoe and scars on her ex-husband. It's two different things, right? But anyway, it's about acknowledging the real harm caused by racism and affirming that it's unacceptable in a just society. And if it's the land of the free and, having all this value about American ideals, there's consequences for what Hulk Hogan has said. And it's very harmful in the black community or to marginalized societies, the way how Hogan and his actions has been erased, and the consequences of what he's done, and just said, oh yeah, because he did Andre the Giant, it's absorbed everything, and that's, and the pain of what he's caused. Now, it comes to a question, can you separate the artist from their behaviour? Can you listen to R. Kelly, Chris Brown, guilt-free? And I find that really, really tricky, but sometimes the music is banging, sometimes the music is banging. But being a millennial, you just have to think about these choices, and it's annoying because when nostalgia, when you've grown up and your culture and your environment is surrounded by these influential public figures, you can't just cut things out. That's, you've been socialized. It's easier to cut someone who's been new. You don't have to have that in your life. But when your childhood is wrapped around these different cultures and public figures and you've got joy from it, it's super complex. So there's some aesthetic separation, the aesthetic separation is paramount. The creative output of, what Hogan did, like the wrestling matches, the catchphrases, the cultural moments, that should be independently from the person. If you think about an actor like Tom Cruise, I don't know what sort. I think he played. Did he play like a Nazi or something? I can't remember, like a Tarantino film. Anyway, when these actors play these villainous roles, you won't be like, Tom Cruise is a bad guy. He's playing a role, and we judge Tom separately. And some people not think about the Scientology and what he does is weird, but he can still thrive in Hollywood all these years later, and his career is really not really affected. So why can't we do this for wrestlers, or why can't we do this for some musicians? So we can do that in acting, but it's a bit tricky. And the joy of entertainment and the escape provided by, Hulk Hogan, Hulk Hogan helped people escape in their hard times. Some people would argue that is distinct from the moral character of the person. And from this viewpoint, enjoying Hogan's wrestling does not equate to endorsing his racist views. And that's what people want to harp on about. However, for others who are targeted by his racist behaviour, the separation is impossible. Because what you do in the locker room, how you are, how you think, you can't separate being racist. And if you revel in it and that's how you think, that's how you are, and that's how you are. You are what you think, right? So when the artists or Hogan's actions directly contradict the values they outwardly espouse, being a real American, it taints that perception of their work. So as a black wrestling fan, for the person who really cheered, who embodied heroism, who's, him using racial slurs against people who look like me, that's very, it cannot be repaired, unfortunately. It's a painful choice to cling to this childhood hero who I cherished, who I loved, and knows inherent racism, and it's a betrayal of trust. I can't trust you, man. I can't trust you. And his identity and his character is linked to this, lack of morality. And the thing sometimes with celebritism and popular culture is like sometimes you think charisma can erase all these type of things. Just because you're superstardom doesn't. Sometimes it creates that shield. Some people are blinded. Some people want to disassociate so bad from the moral character of Hulk Hogan. They do not even want to even acknowledge it, because if they have to engage in it, they have to admit that they're a flawed person. And they're not a critical person. They'll have critical thinking skills. And they just want to do blindly. And that's why you have a lot of group thinking, a lot of crowd. When you think about certain movements in life, why did that person join that cult? Why people at work don't say anything to their bosses? Because it's sheep mentality and, group think and culture. And devoted fan bases, when you're a fan, and there's financial interests like the WWE to the image. Like, look at Stone Cold. We know domestic violence has happened. And also, I stopped listening to the Stone Cold. Stone Cold is really good about protecting his brand, and there's always been rumors of him being racist back in the past with black wrestlers. And when I listened to his podcast, I can't remember, like probably 10 years ago, 8 years ago, I used to listen to his podcast all the time. And he had a band on, I can't remember the band, and his band, he really likes, was describing coffee to black actresses like Halle Berry. Like, I like my coffee Halle Berry Brown. And Stone Cold was like, and that's how he feels. If his group, who he likes, that band, can talk about how they describe black people as skin as coffee, and he goes to Starbucks, I want a Cadbury coffee, and he can put that on his podcast X amount of years ago. That's how Stone Cold. So I'm thinking, like, Stone Cold, like, these rumors are just adding up, and the way how you did domestic violence on your wife, and how Vince McMahon tried to cover it up and stuff like that. So I'm sure, Stone Cold is very, very careful about his branding and getting money. So I have to really look at Stone Cold with a side eye at top. But that's not about Stone Cold. We've got to look at Hulk Hogan here. So, think of your devoted fan base. The sheer force can make it difficult for them to examine the negativity and the morality of Hulk Hogan. And people idolize people. And when you have an idol, it's really hard to backtrack, because you got to think at yourself, am I wrong? There's something flawed with me. And yeah, there is. And I think sometimes I listen to Chris Brown. I don't actively listen, but if I get caught and I listen, that's a catchy to Chris Brown, it's like, I can appreciate, I can observe, I like the music, but do I openly endorse Chris Brown? No. I don't think he's learnt his lessons of being perpetrating violence towards women. I don't think he has. And women endorse that. So I'm not a patron. I don't support. But if in the act and it comes on, I have to make that decision. And this is a systematic issue reflecting how society treats idols, from ordinary individuals to the privilege of being a celebrity. These traits make them very appealing, what we like for them, and we have this parasocial kind of relationship, what we think we have with this celebrity, which paradoxically allows them to evade the same type of scrutiny applied to others, to like a co-worker or a friend or something like that. And it does highlight this societal blind spot. That's why on SmackDown, I just had to skip what they're trying to erase what Hogan does. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't say bad things about Hogan, but the way I portrayed him, he's a very complex figure. Why didn't you do this for Sabu? Why didn't we have, remember Sabu that way? Why? So only the amount of draw you bring to wrestling can evade your responsibilities, And it comes to the question, is like racism, is it forgivable? Did he learn from his mistake? And forgiveness is a very deeply personal and complex process. It's not something that can be demanded or granted universally by a third party. I was going to go into it. I'm too scared. I was going to talk about some people in certain communities can anyway, let me just not go there. Anyway, so forgiveness is what happens, and it's often earned through genuine remorse, and I don't think Hogan did that. And sustained change behavior, I don't think he did that. And tangible efforts to repair the harm or cause. He could have done this and he didn't. And this involves active anti-racist work, education, advocacy, not just isolated apologies to save his bag. And he did offer apologies and said that he lived in a rough neighbourhood and things were thrown around. However, even the wrestlers really questioned the sincerity of his apologies, especially later of his political, public political alignment. And the doubt lingers whether he really learned from his mistake or just expressed regret of being caught, and that's where I'm leaning. Genuine learning often manifests in consistent anti-racist action, not just words. And this happened over 10 years ago. And there's no evidence in his behaviour to show this. If you go into court, people are not just saying, what you should have, could have done. Your behaviour protects your future and how you are. And we haven't seen no evidence of that. So the absence of this demonstrates demonstrational behavior of the last 10 years has not been shown, unfortunately. So that leads me to think about moving forward, think about the Western conscience, our role as critical consumers, passing figures like Hulk Hogan serve as like a potent reminder that legacies are not monolithic. They're a mosaic of achievements, they're a mosaic of flaws, they have real impact on diverse communities. And as we navigate these complex legacies, yes, he brought us joy. I cannot deny that. NWO, WrestleMania 18, him and The Rock, best moments. And people say one of his best moments was Andre the Giant. I was not there, but I can appreciate the Andre the Giant stuff in the 80s. I was not born then, but I can appreciate it, man. I can appreciate ya. I cannot deny this guy has brought joy to the millions and millions. But we have to be fair, and just like a historian, you have to navigate these complex legacies and look at the evidence, look at the sources, what are there. And it's crucial that we are consumers of culture and members of societies. And I don't think it's good to refuse or simplify or sanitize history. And that's what the WWE is doing. They're sanitizing history. You can call Nikki Bella the person, or the Bella twins, to revolutionize women's wrestling. That's sanitization. No shade. I do consume the Nikki Bella content and Bella content. I'm not part of the Bella army, but I do enjoy their content. So they don't acknowledge the contributions and the controversy, and therefore, oops, I need to hurry up and do this because I need to go. Anyway, they don't prioritize the voices of the harmed. WWE has done a good job of prioritizing and having an uncomfortable discussion around this. They're thinking about their coins. And genuine accountability, Hogan did not do that. And recognize the systematic issues, how charisma and power can insulate individuals from full consequence of their actions. And these challenge these inherent biases. And talking about The Rock, terribly, greatly charismatic, but is The Rock coming into a villain now because of his actions? I'm not talking about being racist, the way how he treats fans, the way how he inserts himself and out of certain storylines and taking the wrestling fans for granted. There is a saying, you can live long, I'm butchering it, but you can live long to be a villain, or, you can be a hero or live long to be a villain. And I think that's happening to Rock's character, so he needs to be careful. This video is not here to condemn him to eternal damnation. It's about grappling with the messiness of human existence, but sometimes we're good and bad. And when you do something very moral and you have not seen any redemption or change your actions towards it, you're going to get your criticisms. And I think that is fair, and I feel like you should stand on the same energy, be respectful, but stand on the same energy on the premiere of Netflix. Was it January the 5th or 6th? Stand on that same energy 6 months ago, 7 months ago. Stand on that same energy. But be respectful about it, and don't be a hypocrite. Like, I loved him, he did this for me, just because he died. What happened if he doesn't die? If he didn't die a couple of days ago, how would you treat him? So I think we need to build a society, no matter how their fame, they're held to a good standard. He's not above the law of decency and respect, and where the pain of racism should never be dismissed. He should live his life. But I think, what are your thoughts about the cultural impact and the need of ethical accountability in wrestling? And, it could apply for Vince McMahon, it could apply for Triple H. If someone cheats in being an athlete in the Olympics, they're held to accountable, right? They want to be the best. So why can't we hold our wrestlers accountable for their immoral actions and just pretend like they never did anything, rather if they are alive or dead? R.I.P. Hulk Hogan. I hope his family is blessed and going through this difficult time. But at the same time, he's the one who dug his grave, if you will, and did these heinous things and has not redeemed himself when he had the chance and had years to do so. And that will stick with you, unfortunately. The complexities of a racist human being. Rest in conscience.